You're watching City Channel 4, your window to our community.
I'm real pleased to introduce a colleague of mine at the College of Nursing. Pam Terrell is a nurse, and for nearly 12 years has been a sexual assault nurse examiner. Okay. She not only sees people in the emergency room and does that kind of forensic nursing, works with people who've just been victimized or assaulted. She also teaches community members and other nurses so that they can become certified to be sexual assault nurse examiners. This isn't, we're both well aware that this isn't a real uplifting, pleasant topic to talk about, but I see it as an extremely important topic. There's a lot of this going on out there that's not reported. And part of what Pam's going to talk about is how we can support friends and family who may have had some troubles with this too, in addition to many other things. So that's enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to Pam, and I'm sure she'll be glad to entertain questions as they come up too. So thanks, Pam.
One thing though, before I get started, I wanted to tell you about this story that my coworker just told me right this afternoon before I got here, and it's been on my mind. It's really bothering me. Dan is a coworker of mine who is a medical administrator. He went to Chicago and he was telling me that he got assaulted in Chicago just 2 days ago when he was there. So I was like, what happened? And he said, well, we were out for dinner and we went for drinks and after the meeting, and I was walking home to go to the hotel, and I stopped at a money machine because I needed some more cash. And he said, and I pulled out the cash, and before I knew it, somebody was behind me, and it felt like something in my back, and said, give me the money. I was like, I can't believe that happened to you. I know you, and I can't believe that. I said, well, so was it dark? And he was like, yeah, it was really dark. I said, were you drinking? Well, yeah, we'd been drinking. Well, what were you wearing, Dan? Were you wearing that nice leather coat and your Rolex watch? Yeah. Did you cry out and ask for help and say, stop, don't do that to me? No, I was scared to death. So you can probably see that this is a made-up story now. And that's how, victims of sexual assault feel. Because people say to them, were you walking alone? What were you wearing? Were you drunk? All of those same kind of things that somebody might say to a victim who was robbed. But do we say those things? No, because we don't think that way. And yet for victims of sexual assault, somehow it's always their fault. They put themselves in that position somehow to be assaulted. So I just wanted to use that as an example, and those are some of the issues I wanted to address tonight were myths and misconceptions of sexual assault and what victims hear. The other thing I wanted to say was that, as Todd said, this is an unpleasant subject, and just by statistics alone, there's probably people in this room who have been sexually assaulted. So I wanted to kind of do what we call in nursing a trigger warning, so that, if things bother you, feel free to get up and leave or, move around, because it is a sensitive topic, and we in our society don't talk that much about sexual assault. The other thing is that, language, I may use some words that are words that might not be used in normal everyday conversation. I'm a nurse, I'm used to saying those words. So I just wanted to tell you that up front too. And also, I usually use she as a victim and he as a perpetrator, because the majority of victims are women and the majority of perpetrators are men, but that doesn't mean that's the way it always is. And that's not a stereotype, that's just facts. So I wanted to clear that up before somebody says, well, what about men? So I wanted to first talk about some common myths. So do you all have any common myths that you think of when you think of a sexual assault victim?
Nobody's going to believe them.
Nobody's going to believe them, right? I think that's true. She brought it on herself, and she, right, females.
If you're in a relationship, it's
Right, can't be that person if you're in a relationship, or even if you're married, your spouse can't sexually assault you. So those are all not truths, those are myths. Some of the other myths are, or some of the other things that you hear about is something called regret sex. We hear that a lot, especially at the university, where people will say, well, she, went home with somebody and she really wanted to have sex, but then afterwards she woke up and realized that her boyfriend was going to be mad at her, and so, now she's saying it was rape. So, a lot of people call that regret sex. Another myth is that, if you're drunk, you deserve it. What did you think was going to happen if you walked home with somebody? And yet we all know, some of us drink, not all of us, but some of us drink, and some of us have had times when they maybe drank one drink too much, but they didn't expect that they would get sexually assaulted because they were out having a good time. So other myths are, what you're wearing. Does that mean that you should be sexually assaulted because you're wearing something risque, short, revealing? Not really. And if you didn't fight back, if you didn't call out, that's another thing that people think that victims should do, is fight back. Well, it couldn't have really been sexual assault because she didn't fight back. And actually, there's a lot of research that's been done in the last 10 years about fighting back, and it's called the neurobiology of trauma. I don't know if people have heard that term, but it has to do with your brain and releasing chemicals and hormones to your body so that people respond, whether it's a sexual assault victim or maybe somebody who's in any kind of trauma, any kind of traumatic event, car accidents, police officers, whatever. But you get these three primary responses, which are fight, flight, or freeze. And we've always heard about the fight or flight, but the freeze part is something newer that's been discovered, and sometimes people just freeze. They can't do anything. They're just immobile, and it's this flood of hormones and neurotransmitters that are kind of messing up their brain and impacts their cortical, higher thinking levels of their brain, so that they just freeze. And I've heard many victims say, I froze because I just wanted to get it over with. I was too afraid of what was going to happen, and I just wanted to get through it. And my response is, you did what you had to do to survive. You did get through it, and that was the right response at that time. You did the right thing for you. So a lot of those things, and I think the most common myth at the end I wanted to say was, a lot of people say it can't happen to me, but that is not true. It can happen to anybody. And I think that's why people say, well, what did she or he do to deserve that? What risk did they put themselves at? Because, we're all afraid to even think that it might happen to us. So I think that's a common way to guard yourself, is to say, it can't happen to me. But it can happen to people. Every 107 seconds, someone in the United States is sexually assaulted. 1 in 5 to 6 women in their lifetime will be sexually assaulted, and 1 in 33 men will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. If you're a college student, a woman 18 to 24 years old enrolled in college, you're 3 times more likely than other women of that same age group to be sexually assaulted. And repeat victimization is not uncommon. That's another misconception. People think, well, again, what did they do? They obviously don't know how to protect themselves. Maybe they should take a self-defense class. That's not it. All of this is looking at the victim and saying, what did she or he do wrong? When actually we need to focus some on the perpetrator, the people who are committing these crimes. It's not the victim's problem, it's the other person's problem that's doing it. So over 1/3 of women who were raped as a minor will be raped again as an adult. So it's a hard, traumatic event. And we look at rape as a, mind, body, spirit event. It impacts all parts of you, not just the physical. It's a very personal crime. It's very personal. It's your body that's taken away from you. You didn't consent to have that done. Certain populations are at a higher risk for being sexually assaulted. Can you think of any of those populations? Who might they be? People who are poor. Mm-hmm. You know, homeless people, people in prison. Prison inmates are at higher risk. Undocumented immigrants are at a higher risk because, you know, they can't use the legal system. They don't want to report. They don't want to tell anybody because of the risks, the other risks to them. People with disabilities, both physical and mental impairments, are at very high risk. And you're going to find this shocking, but 9 out of 10 people with a developmental impairment will be sexually assaulted in their lifetime. Right, and out of that, 49% experience it multiple times. So again, some of the research shows that, you know, people who have impairments are more at risk because, you know, they may have a caretaker who, or in a situation where they have a caretaker who's a bad person, and, you know, that person will say to the caretaker will say to the person, you know, well, if you tell on me, then I'm not going to come help you. And if this is somebody who is, you know, in a wheelchair, is really dependent on their caretaker, they're not going to say anything because, you know, they're protecting themselves and their livelihood, their ability to live each day. So it's a really high risk group of individuals. Also, LGBT people and transgendered people. Transgendered people, 1 out of 2, 50% of them experience some kind of sexual assault in their lifetime. So it's very, very high rate. 85% of victims and rapists are acquaintance. So that kind of dispels that myth about strangers, because I think that we're getting past that myth in recent years, but it's always been it's the person who you don't know that you have to fear, the person that jumps out of the bush that's just waiting for you. It's actually the person that you know. And from my perspective, that's even more of a horrific thing to happen because you trust that person. You think that they're your friend, or they're your friend's brother, or they're your best friend's father, or whatever. So you trust that person. And when this event happens, you know, the brain's like, this can't be right. I mean, I know you. You know, this can't be happening to me. I must be doing something wrong. I must be misinterpreting this. So it's very difficult, you can see, for mental health, I think, and for healing afterwards because, you know, it's somebody that they knew and trusted. 68% of sexual assaults are not reported to law enforcement. And again, you know, these are numbers, they come from the RAINN organization, Rape, Abuse, Incest National Network, and from the National Alliance to Prevent Sexual Violence. So these numbers are all, you know, they have some base to them, but it's very hard to get statistics because people don't report and they don't want to talk about it. So some of them are, you know, rough guesstimates, I think, too. But anyway, 68% of sexual assaults are not reported to law enforcement, and 98% of rapists never spend a day in jail. So it's really a crime that is not, we're not doing well, I think, for our victims. You know, so our statistics, I'll back up and tell you a little bit about myself. As Todd said, I'm a sexual assault nurse examiner, and I also coordinate the Johnson County Sexual Assault Response Team. And it was named Johnson County because it actually was a group of healthcare providers at the University Hospital that kind of started talking about the need for a coordinated effort for victims of sexual assault. They wanted it to be inclusive, so they called it Johnson County SART, or Sexual Assault Response Team, but it really has no connection to the county government or administration. We are a group of agencies who work together to try to provide more coordinated services for victims. So it includes RVAP, the Rape Victim Advocacy Program, 5 law enforcement agencies in our area: Johnson County, Iowa City, the University, North Liberty, and Coralville. And then both emergency rooms at our hospitals, Mercy and the University. the staff that are in the emergency rooms, we work with them, and then the Johnson County Attorney's Office. So we meet regularly on a monthly basis and talk about issues, process, what's happening, how we can serve people better. The other piece of this is that there are 8 to 10 nurses who are specifically trained, like myself, sexual assault nurse examiners, or the acronym is SANE, S-A-N-E. So we are the people who do the medical forensic exams when a victim comes to the hospital ER. That's where we do our exams. And what that means is that we can do an exam to make sure that people are not injured, but also collect evidence so that if they decide they want to pursue this legally, they have some evidence. And we keep it in like a sexual assault evidence kit box. And you may have seen recently all the information about the untested kits that are out there. That's this kind of thing that they're talking about, are the sexual assault evidence kits. So anyway, in the last couple years, the numbers have really exploded. I think because of the attention from the media about untested sexual assault kits and the President's initiative looking at sexual assault on campus, and there's just been some more dialogue about it. There's been a couple movies released, documentaries that have addressed sexual assault issues. So, there's been a lot more talk about it. And in 2014, RVAP, the advocacy program, provided 1,614 contacts for 724 individuals. And for the first 6 months of this year, they provided 1,294. So almost just 300 less in 6 months than the whole year. And they saw 788 individuals so far in 6 months as compared to 724 last year. So there's a lot more interest. I think also I was thinking the Sandusky case, with people being abused, that brought forth a lot of calls and people wanting to talk about sexual abuse in their past. As far as the sexual assault nurse exams, we do about 90 a year. It goes up or down, 5 to 10 each year, but it's around 90 to 95. And we perform these exams at Mercy Hospital and at the University Hospital. About 20 to 25% of the exams are done at Mercy Hospital. So, any questions about that so far? Okay. So I just wanted to talk too about the costs of sexual assault to victims and also, to our society. So we think of the cost or the impact of sexual assault in terms of physical impact, social impact, emotional, occupational or academic impact, and then also financial impacts. So financial, I wanted to start with that, is that rape is the most costly of all crimes for its victims. So more so than burglary or theft. And it's estimated that $127 billion per year is spent on rape victims in the United States, and that doesn't include kids. So the majority of that, when I looked at how they broke it down, and these are stats that are used in all the literature from about 1997. But when I looked at it, they looked at medical costs, which is actually the smallest amount, and then mental health costs, and then lost productivity, and then also the pain and suffering. So, we always hear that. I hear that with like law cases, and I don't really know how they estimate that cost, but that was by far the largest percent of this amount. So it was $110,000 per victim is what it costs for one sexual assault victim. 79% of victims lose 1 to 5 days of work, and 50% had to quit their jobs or were either themselves or were forced to quit by their employer within the first year after an assault occurred because of their responses, because of the way that their lives were progressing, the way that they were handling this. So it has a huge impact on individuals. 20% of victims' families and acquaintances missed work because of the impact too. So you can see it has a huge financial impact, on work and school. Academic, lost, attendance, lost attendance. We talked about this, lost productivity at work. Your concentration obviously may be a lot poorer whether you're doing work or school work. The legal costs, there's legal costs to being sexually assaulted in terms of not so much money, because sexual assault is a crime against the state, actually. So the county prosecutors are the people who prosecute against the perpetrators. That is because it's a criminal act. Victims do have a possibility or a choice of also filing a civil case. And if they did that, then that would cost them legal fees. But a criminal case does not cost the victim any fee. But it does cost them time, maybe missing work. A lot of times they want to go to court and it may not come to trial for a year afterwards, or maybe even 2 years or more. But that's a long time to have to carry that burden with you, to think about it. And then, have to go talk to the police, go talk to the courthouse, go, maybe get a no contact order. All those things are impacting the victim. And then, just recounting the events, because so many people, are asking you, well, tell me again what happened. How did this happen? Where did it happen? All those kinds of things. So there's a lot of impact on the victims. Also physical impact. So we talk about injuries. There could be physical injuries to bodies, like arms, legs, neck. Sometimes victims may get beaten up, may have some strangulation issues. Strangulation may happen. So there's the physical impacts. There's also, talking every time we see somebody, we have to talk to them about the possibility or the risk of exposure to sexually transmitted diseases. We don't know who that person was that assaulted them, or even if they do know them, they don't really know about their sexual history. And we have to just assume that somebody who does this kind of behavior is probably somebody who engages in other risky behaviors. So we offer prophylactic medications for sexually transmitted diseases. And there's a common 3 that we offer to help prevent that. There are also treatment doses, but that, and then we also have to talk about HIV, another STI, hepatitis B, and the other 3 were gonorrhea. Syphilis is not so much, actually, but chlamydia, and then trichomoniasis. So, but we do, all of those we have to talk about, which is, who wants to hear that after they just had all this happen to them? The other thing is the risk of pregnancy. It's known that one unprotected episode of intercourse, 5% of the time, results in a pregnancy. So, there's women getting pregnant from their assaults. So something else that we need to talk to them about. We can offer them Plan B or emergency contraception if they're interested in taking that. Other things that happen to sexual assault victims: sleeping and eating disorders. Long term, sometimes there's abdominal pain, long-term abdominal pain, headaches, nervousness, physical complaints. Suicide. 4 times, somebody who is sexually assaulted is 4 times more likely to contemplate suicide than somebody who hadn't been sexually assaulted. Alcohol and drug abuse are another thing that increases for victims who have sexually assaulted. Abuse of drugs is 26 more times likely than somebody who was not sexually assaulted, and alcohol abuse is 13 times more likely. So again, methods of coping that are not the best choices, but you can see how somebody can get really depressed and trying to look for ways to cope. Another thing is the self-harming behaviors. I don't know if you've heard about cutters, people who cut their wrists, or arms, other parts of their body just to help relieve the pain. So, that their sexual abuse victims are at risk for that too. Social impact, their impact on their relationship with their friends, their sexual impacts, how can they have normal sexual relationships after that for a while, or can they ever? I mean, that's a difficult thing that needs to be addressed. Their self-esteem and confidence is usually pretty low after this kind of event too. And we all know where that can lead down, the bad path too. So emotional impacts, 3 times more likely to suffer from depression. And a sexual assault victim is 6 times more likely to suffer from PTSD, post-traumatic stress syndrome. So, all these bad things, it's just a lot of negative stuff here. Also, emotional impact is, the humiliation, the fear, the self-blame. I haven't met one victim who didn't blame themselves for what happened because, they say, I should have, whatever it is. I should have seen this coming. I should have known that if I got drunk, I might put myself at risk. I should have not gone home with this person, whatever that is. But there's a lot of guilt and self-blame. Sometimes also another emotional impact is flashbacks. Sexual assault victims are more likely to have flashbacks about the terror, the trauma that they experienced. And a lot of those can be triggered by auditory or smell kinds of things, touch, those kinds of things can trigger those flashbacks for them. So let's move on to, what can we say to a victim? How can we help? What can we do? So I think it's important, to have some responses that maybe you have thought of, because we know that the first person that a victim says, it reveals that they were just sexually assaulted, it's very important how that victim or how that person responds to the victim. So, if I tell you and you're my friend and you go, well, gosh, Pam, you were really drunk last night, then I'm going to say, oh yeah, I shouldn't have gotten drunk. I'm not going to say anything else. I don't want to tell anybody because it was my fault. So it's really important to say, well, I'm really sorry that happened to you. I mean, that's, one of the first things that you can say really is, I'm sorry that happened to you. Nobody should have to go through that kind of thing. It's not your fault. The only person that could have prevented this from happening really is the perpetrator, him or herself. I mean, you were the victim. Somebody did this to you. You're not alone. I'm here. I'm glad that you felt like you could trust me and open up to say that this happened to you, and I'm really sorry. What can I do to help? Can I suggest some resources for you? Those kinds of things. And again, it's I believe you. So instead of saying, well, what did you do to deserve it? Saying, I'm sorry this happened to you. I believe you. So that's where I come to this part of where I wanted to show a video. We have a campaign, there's a national campaign, and we've started it here. It's called Start by Believing. And that's really the whole message, is you start by believing. When a victim of sexual assault says, I was raped, you start by believing. This is a national campaign that's been going on, I don't even know, for several years. It's through End Violence Against Women International, and it's really just to try to educate the public that victims of sexual assault are not at fault, and people don't believe them. And so this video outlines several of the high-profile cases that you may have heard about over the last few years in the news. With some of the football teams, high school football teams, or a mass murder. I think it was in Ohio. So anyway, it's kind of a downer again, but I think I wanted to make the point that again, people aren't being believed, and that's what this whole message is to start by believing. So the rest of this are examples of communities that have Start by Believing campaigns. So I just think, in retrospect, a lot of those situation cases, it's horrific to think that those victims were ignored. But, it's easier to see in retrospect, that they were real. But again, it's the message of, we have to start by believing. We can investigate, we can take time to look at it later, but we need to start by believing what the victim is saying. And then, if days, weeks later, it doesn't all add up, doesn't make sense, then, maybe there's something else there. But again, in the beginning, when somebody is traumatized, it doesn't always make sense what they're saying. The impact of the trauma on their brain and on their words doesn't allow that person to make sense sometimes. The story that they give is not linear. It's not like, well, I did this and then this happened and then he did this. So it's this whole message, campaign message is to start by believing. So I think that's really important, and that's really my message to you all, what you can do for victims, acquaintances that you know who are sexually assaulted. So in terms of what we can do to help, I think it's really important to examine your own beliefs, your own attitudes. I can say that when I first started doing this 12 years ago, sometimes I might have thought, well, that was a stupid decision, a choice to walk home in the dark when you're drunk by yourself, whatever. But, I see that that's not, so many times people do that and nothing happens to them. So it's not their fault. It's the perpetrator, the person who's taking advantage of them, their fault. So again, examining your beliefs and then also challenging other people when they say something to you about, well, what did she think was going to happen? So that we understand that that's that's the way people do react, and that's not being helpful to victims. We want to support them. We want to encourage them to get help. So that's the other thing, encourage them, if they're willing, to get help, to go to the hospital, to get a medical forensic exam. We can do exams and they don't have to collect the evidence, but we can still offer them prevention medicines for pregnancy or for STIs. And all of this is at no charge through the state. The Attorney General's Office, Iowa Attorney General's Office, has a Crime Victims Assistance Division, and under that is the Sexual Abuse Examination Program. So the exam and the medications are paid for by the state. The victim does not use their insurance. So, there is a great victim support in our state for not only victims of sexual assault, but also for robbery and other kinds of crimes. We have a very good system here. In some states, it used to be that the exams were tied to the person reporting to police. That's not true. The victim doesn't have to report to police. It's their choice whether they want to report to the police or not. So, we're very victim-centered here. The other thing is that, whenever the nurse goes to the hospital, we always have an advocate present. So whether the patient, the victim wants to go to the hospital or they don't want to go, I would strongly encourage them to get hooked up with an advocate. Our VAP, Rape Victim Advocacy Program, have people who are advocates who are specially trained to work with victims who have been sexually assaulted. And again, those services are provided at no cost. And studies show that victims who are hooked up with an advocate do a lot better in terms of recovery in the long term because they have somebody to support them, they have somebody there to stand up for them, to maybe help prevent re-victimization through maybe police reports or even through the medical exams. Asking the person over and over again, what happened? What did you do? So the advocate's there and can be with the patient throughout the whole process, throughout the whole system. Even if they go to court, the advocate can be there for them. So it's a great asset for victims of sexual assault. And then the resources in our area, I've mentioned our VAP, but there's also Monsoon, which is United Asian Women of Iowa. So they work with women of Asian languages. They're a multilingual group that can come to the hospital or to the police or wherever, RVAP, and work with Asian victims. And then there's an African group called NISA, and they also respond and are multilingual for some of the African languages. So they are also great advocates to know about. And ways to assess or to get a hold of them, are through their own websites, but a lot through RVAP. They work closely with RVAP. RAC is the Women's Resource Action Center at the University of Iowa. They're another great resource. They're a confidential resource for victims of sexual assault, for domestic violence. So another great place to refer people to. Counselors, several victims may already see their own counselor. So, asking them if they feel comfortable going back to that person to get supported. Or if not, go to RVAP and talk to them first. Some of the clinics around town we work with in terms of follow-up, sometimes the Emma Goldman, Planned Parenthood, free medical clinic, private doctor's offices, and community clinics. Law enforcement agencies are another good resource. They can tell you what your options are, what can happen if you do this or that. They're a good source of information, and again, you're not mandated to report it. So another good place to talk to, what are the options for me? And for a university, either employee, a worker, or a student, the university has the Office of the Sexual Misconduct Coordinator, and they're another great resource of what they can help you with through your job or through school in making accommodations for victims who have been sexually assaulted. If it was somebody that you worked with, or you live in a dorm and it's the person that lives next door, you probably don't want to have to go back and see that person. So how can they help you? Make it easier for you to arrange the physical setting maybe, or make other suggestions, class schedule changes for students. So there are a lot of resources out there, and I hope that you all will remember about those and supporting victims who are sexually assaulted. So, any questions? Yeah, okay.
In the month of April, isn't that Sexual Assault Awareness Month? Could we here start a campaign for that?
Yes, it is. April is Sexual Assault Awareness Month. And actually, we have started the Start by Believing campaign. It's just difficult to get it out, so I am open for any suggestions. We have a website located on RVAP, and like some of those communities in that video that you didn't get to see, we have like law enforcement officers, city councilmen, all holding these signs that say they start by believing. So there is a lot of support for this in the community, especially with providers and community workers, but I really would like to get the word out to the community that, we need this every place. So if you have any suggestions, I'm open for that. So, in Sexual Assault Awareness Month, we usually have multiple activities. You may have seen the Clothesline Project on the Pentacrest, where victims make t-shirts and they're all displayed. They're very impactful to read what victims have said. We have some open discussion groups. We showed a movie and had discussion afterwards. So we try to use that month to promote awareness for all the resources that are here in our area. Yeah.
So do victims have the right to stay anonymous, or do you see that by state?
No, they can. So the question is, can they remain anonymous? Well, it kind of depends, I guess. I mean, yes, if they want to, but it depends on the services that they want. So Were you thinking in terms of reporting?
Like on the back, towards the end of the video, there were 3 girls who were harassed on social media. So I was just wondering, like, how much can they keep their name withdrawn from the public? Or
Yeah, well, I can just say, I mean, so the advocates, you know, are bound by confidentiality. They can't say anything. As far as healthcare provider, we have HIPAA laws, so we can't really say anything. The police are very, I think, thoughtful and considerate of people, you know, not wanting their names out there. I mean, they explain to you if you want to pursue charges, you know, and we need to look for this suspect, then, you know, we're going to have to say to the suspect that so-and-so said you know, sexually assaulted them. So, you know, that breaks that anonymity. But, you know, step by step, victims are informed what might happen and what their choices are. So like if we do that evidence collection kit, if somebody doesn't want their name on the outside of the box, because we label it, I mean, it's like, you know, a blood sample. You take the blood, you need to know who's it from. So the sexual assault kit is the same thing. We need to know who it's from. But if they say, I don't want my name on the outside, my friend's dad, my dad, you know, somebody works at the police department, they're in the dispatch, you know, they work in this hospital, I don't want my name out there. We don't have to put the name on the outside. So we try to work with the victim in protecting their anonymity if that's what they want.
Weren't those things, these girls were videotaped during the sexual assault and didn't even know about it till it was put on
Yes.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
Social media? Oh my goodness.
Right.
Oh my
And, you know, the impact on them. I mean, and that's out there. Whether you take it down off of that site, it's already gone, you know, multiple places and you can't find it all. You can't recall it.
My question is on prevention, and I'm raising boys, so that's where my thoughts are of what's going on in the public. I mean, I know what I'm doing at home, but what's out there public-wise that to help reduce the amount of sexual assaults going on?
There's a lot of work being done in terms of like consent, you know, getting consent for, you know, kissing somebody. May I Kiss You is a program that's a national program that is presented to children in schools sometimes. I mean, you have to sign up for it. But and then recently there's a lot of emphasis on bystander intervention. So, you know, teaching people to speak up if they have a question, you know, or a concern. Especially men, you know, to intervene and say, you know, wait a minute, this doesn't look right. You know, do you need some help here? What's going on? So bystander intervention is another prevention method. And then, you know, just I think talking about, you know, talking to your partner about sexual activity. There's a lot of that, you know, encouragement in schools and maybe, you know, can happen from families. I mean, it's one of the most intimate acts that we do, and yet people don't talk about it. So, you know, trying to teach kids and, you know, adults participating in a sexual act to actually talk about it beforehand, to get consent. Respect, you know, another big word that's used. I mean, there's a lot of campaigns about respect and in her shoes and all kinds of different things. So, raising awareness.
When I was teaching, I had a resource room and I had fifth grade boys, and there was a real change in their behaviors, and I was, you know, your ears perk up and what in the world is going on? My goodness, they'd gotten cable television, and they found that if they woke up at 2 in the morning, they could begin to watch these things that they had never seen before. And this whole little group of fifth grade boys were, and it was scary.
Right, it's very scary, and unfortunately, that's where a lot of kids learn about sex is on pornographic sites, on cable or whatever, right?
Yeah, and I told of course, I talked to the parents, and one was the deputy sheriff's son, and he didn't even know that they
Right.
were looking at these things or that they were available. What do we do with that kind of thing?
We also have to be more aware, I think, of how media, everything from print media to television to cable websites, there's so much pornography out there too, and how, for the most part, it objectifies women, and what kind of a negative influence that has, especially on men and young men, and the way they view women. I think that's something that parents and the rest of us really need to work on a lot too, with boys and young men.
I get the men to work on it.
Yeah. I wish they'd do away with all those Hardee's hamburger commercials with that's a perfect example, and that's considered,
selling hamburgers.
yeah, it's all around us, that sort of thing. It's really tough to fight that, but we need to be aware of that and what kind of influence that has, I think, on young people.
When you're watching TV with them.
Yeah.
So since the Penn State situation, have you seen more education within like athletic departments or any programs that are offered to athletes?
I'm not as involved in that piece because I'm a medical piece, but I know that RVAP and probably some other organizations like even RAC have met with the university athletic teams for several years actually, and I think since that happened it has been increasing in terms of the number of athletic contacts they're getting. But yes, we've worked, RVAP has worked a lot with the athletic departments, and I'm sure there's other people, I'm just not aware of it.
Because I would assume that coaches are mandatory reporters, at least in the state of Iowa. I know in Pennsylvania they don't have the mandatory reporting law, so.
They are here, right.
So the newest scandal is just come out this week
In Kentucky.
in Kentucky. I'm sorry. The newest scandal is a mother comes out with a book about her and her daughters, how they went on campus and they slept with the new recruits that came in and for basketball. Yeah, for Kentucky. So that is horrible. And the mother should be ashamed of herself. Her daughter's at 15.
I saw her on TV in a little clip, and she was like, well, it didn't happen until they were older.
Yeah, she lying about
Right.
it. She said that happened. They was 15. Sad.
So, yep.
The church I belong to, and I imagine there are other churches in town that are doing the same thing. First Mennonite has had a safe child training for anyone who works with children in our church in whatever fashion. It's several hours of training. It's horrible that you have to have that, but I'm glad we do it.
Yeah, I agree. Tonight we were really just talking about adolescents and adults, but you're right. Kids are victimized a lot. I don't even know the numbers, but there's a large amount of children that are victimized under 12 years of age.
I think they do a poor job when they don't really let people know where the predators are in the community.
Yeah, they're on the website, you know about that,
The
right?
registry, yeah.
Right, the
I know
registry,
that, but a
but
lot of people don't
know that
check
that's
that
there,
out.
right?
Yeah.
That's
and
true.
Just take their kids to school or pick them up.
Right, there is the Iowa registry, and you can go on it and see who your neighbors are. the sex offender registry. So, well, thank you very much. Sorry it's such a downer of a topic, but I hope you got a little insight. So thank you.
You're watching City Channel 4. On TV, online, on demand, on Facebook, and now on the go on your mobile device.